Welcome to another edition of the Taking Down Trump podcast. I'm Tristan Snell. Coming up, we're going to be getting both into Saturday's shooting as well as controversial Trump VP pick J.D. Vance and why he's the perfect candidate for Trump's ticket based on both his extremism and his connections to dark money. But first, I have a confession to make. I know that I was supposed to go into this episode talking about Project 2025. That was before the news cycle decided to accelerate on us and go into warp speed. We will be going into a big deep dive of Project 2025. I'm raring to go on that and have been doing a lot of homework there. That will be coming soon. But first, let's recap what was an absolutely insane 5 to 7 days of news. First, the craziest stories from law and politics this week, and it was not exactly an easy process to figure out what to talk about because we're getting, I feel like we've had about 6 weeks worth of news in the past 6 days. But obviously, we're going to be talking about the shooting on Saturday. We're going to devote a longer block of time to that. But obviously, we need to begin there with the gunman shooting at Donald Trump and getting killed in the process. We'll be coming back to that. There's stories that would have been massive news stories on their own that got completely buried in the last few days. One of them being the announcement of a ceasefire framework between Israel and Hamas, brokered by President Joe Biden and the State Department. And yet somehow this didn't even really register as a news story for very long, just because things have been happening so quickly. But that's the point that we're living in right now, is that things are just happening so quickly that it's hard to even keep track of some of these major news stories. Another one that just happened today is we now have the guilty verdict, all counts guilty, conviction of Senator Bob Menendez for bribery. Menendez is a Democrat from New Jersey. He was indicted for effectively serving as an agent of the Egyptian government in the United States Senate and receiving, as you probably heard, gold bars at one point was part of his payment. He was given a luxury car. He was given other compensation, and a jury has now convicted him on all counts. Why is this relevant? I think what we really need to see here is that when we say that no one is above the law, we really mean it. It really means no one. I don't care that someone like Menendez is someone that I probably agree with politically on 80 some odd % of issues or more. I don't care that he's in the party to which I belong. He was indicted. He was found guilty by a jury of his peers after what appeared by all accounts to be a fair trial. That is as it should be. That is how the process is supposed to work. It shouldn't matter that he is powerful or high profile or can pay for his legal defense by cashing in gold bars. It shouldn't matter. You don't get to just pick your judges and intimidate jurors and intimidate witnesses and try your case in the media and find creative ways to delay everything. And that will bring us in a moment to what happened down in Florida this week with Judge Cannon. But I'll bring up something else while we're talking about judges, which is, again, another massive news story. Didn't really get much airtime because of everything else that happened. But Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, filing articles of impeachment against Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Samuel Alito for what appears to be gross and brazen corruption by both of them over the past, in Thomas's case, 2 decades. In Alito's case, we really probably still need more investigation there, but there's at least evidence of massive corruption, unreported secret gifts going back at least a decade. In Thomas's case, over $4 million. In Alito's case, at least $170,000 worth of unreported secret gifts from major donors who had business before the Supreme Court. This would have resulted in resignations or hearings or an impeachment proceeding in any other era. And somehow, even though these revelations first came out last year, it took up until now for us to finally start to see some action on it. Someone finally exhibiting some bravery and some courage in bringing this to a proceeding in which we might actually have some justice and accountability here. I still point the finger at the United States Senate and the Judiciary Committee. Even though Democrats have the majority in the Senate, the Judiciary Committee has done virtually nothing so far still to do anything about this corruption and extremism on the court. It is appalling that the committee that should be actually looking into this, that could have held hearings, that could have issued subpoenas, has not done so, has only drafted legislation as though that's going to be the answer, getting it past a filibuster in the Senate and a Republican-led House. Yes, it's unlikely that this impeachment effort is going to succeed, not with the Republicans controlling the House, but it shows what's at stake here with the House in the fall. The ability for Democrats to be able to take back the House and have a check on a possible second Trump presidency, or to be able to carry forward things like an impeachment against corrupt officials. This is something that needs to happen because it is very evident that the Republicans have no interest in holding anyone accountable. And that brings us to Judge Cannon and her dismissal of the case against Donald Trump for the unlawful stealing and retention of classified and other national security and defense-related documents, the Mar-a-Lago case, as we've been calling it. Now, what exactly happened there? Judge Cannon found, in her view, that the entirety of the special counsel's office, that Jack Smith's entire operation, that Jack Smith's appointment as special counsel was somehow flawed, and thereby everything that he's done was without authority, and that the indictment thereby must be dismissed. That is the crux of her 93-page decision that clearly drew quite heavily from a concurrence that Clarence Thomas just wrote in the immunity case that came out recently, and that was helped along by a number of briefs submitted by right-wing advocacy orgs trying to influence the outcome here and succeeding. It's very clear that a lot of this was pulled directly from these arguments by other fixtures within the right-wing legal sphere. But let's go a layer deeper. What the heck is actually happening here? Is it actually right that somehow Jack Smith's appointment was without authority? What's at issue here? This was 93 pages of absolute, utter, sophomoric bullshit. This was the equivalent of somebody bloviating on in a college or law school term paper to come up with a fancified argument stuffed full of irrelevant quotes and things that look smart but aren't. It was a bunch of pretentious crap, all in the name of trying to dance around a very, very simple issue that the Supreme Court previously, in a case involving former President Richard Nixon during the Watergate scandal, was able to dispense with in one sentence. And that is regarding the statutory authority of the Attorney General of the United States to appoint special counsel and other attorneys to handle prosecutions. This is not exactly a controversial idea. It's like, duh, the Attorney General is able to do this. Well, let's just analyze this a little bit very, very quickly. The law in question, the real crux of this comes down to it's Chapter 28 of the U.S. Code, Section 515, so 28 U.S.C. 515. I'm going to read this because it's worth actually quoting from the statute itself. It specifically says that any attorney specially appointed by the Attorney General under law may, when specifically directed by the Attorney General, conduct any kind of legal proceeding civil or criminal, including grand jury proceedings and proceedings before committing magistrate judges, which United States attorneys are authorized by law to conduct. So again, in other words, any attorney, it doesn't have to be somebody who's already a member of the Department of Justice, any attorney that's appointed by the Attorney General, when specifically directed by that Attorney General, can then go and conduct any proceeding that a U.S. attorney would be able to conduct. The U.S. attorneys, just so everybody knows, are the regional sort of sub-officials within the DOJ. There's 93 districts across the country, and those U.S. attorneys are the ones generally who lead these different regional offices. The best known one is the Southern District of New York. They handle a lot of the prosecutions, not all of them. A lot of them are handled by DOJ in Washington, or what's called Main Justice often. But as part of the AG's authority, the AG can then appoint other attorneys to have the same power to conduct proceedings as a U.S. attorney would. This is not exactly a controversial idea. This law has been on the books since 1966. Okay, and then let's be clear what that means. It means that Congress passed this into law. Congress already delegated its authority to say, hey, you, AG, you can actually go ahead and appoint these people. And that fits in within the Constitution, where it says in the Appointments Clause that Congress can delegate its appointment power to the heads of departments. That's right there in the Constitution. None of this is controversial at all, except that Judge Cannon made it so, really. 99 times out of 100, this case, this issue would have been disposed of very easily. And instead, Judge Cannon writes a book to try to dance around what is actually extremely simple, common sense language from a statute. That, by the way, it's not just the statute. Then when the Supreme Court did look at this in United States versus Nixon back in the 70s, they found, without even really needing to talk about it much, that, of course, the Attorney General has the ability to appoint special prosecutors, special counsel. It just went without saying. It's so obvious. It's very clear here from the face of the statute. And these are coming from these self-described conservatives, these self-described textualists, as they like to call themselves sometimes, where they're supposedly just using the plain meaning of a statute, right? They're not trying to read their own agenda into it. And that is ultimately utter bullshit. It's completely untrue. It's all a smokescreen. It's just a big fat excuse for them to get whatever outcome they feel like getting. When the text doesn't go their way, they will go invent an argument that gets them where they want to go. And that's what Judge Cannon just did. And it's going to be appealed, but it's going to slow down that Florida case. It's not going to go to trial anytime soon. I do believe that this will ultimately be overturned, and we're going to have to keep an eye on it. And we, the people, are going to have to continue to insist on accountability for this runaway judiciary, because the irony of all of this is that in these decisions, and the immunity decision was another one with SCOTUS, these right-wing judges run around saying no one should be usurping, the executive shouldn't be usurping the authority that of Congress, when it is the judiciary that is usurping the authority. The judiciary is taking that power unto itself, taking it away from the other branches and saying, no, we know best, and we're going to tell you what the law is, and you can't do anything to stop us. That is what the Supreme Court is doing. The court system overall, these right-wing judges that have been put on, are now completely untethered from any previous standards or principles of law of over 240 years of American history. It's just out the window. This is a naked power grab, cloaked in a bunch of fancy language. 93 pages of bullshit just to get around one sentence in a statute that is so obvious that it really did not need any further explanation. Those are just some of the stories I was covering this week. As always, you can find me on Twitter. Make sure to follow me there and also subscribe to my Substack. Coming up, we've got two different deep dives. First on the shooting at Donald Trump's rally on Saturday, and then on J.D. Vance. Next. Next, we're going to talk about Saturday's shooting. Obviously, it was a shocking event. We're still learning more about exactly what the heck happened, but some things are now becoming abundantly clear. Let's start with the man who was killed by this gunman. His name was Corey Comparator, and he was a retired firefighter, and he brought his family, his wife and his daughters, near the stage where Trump was speaking, and he caught a bullet that was fired at Donald Trump, and he was shielding his wife and his daughters, and he died. Here's the thing, though. This was a man who was a really big Trump supporter. He had driven his family an hour and a half to go to this rally. And Donald Trump, as of this taping, has not called Comparator's widow, Helen. He had not called the family of this man who was a big supporter and died attending one of his rallies. That is just appalling, absolutely appalling. That is not what leadership in America is supposed to look like. Have a heart, have a soul, have the political intelligence to know that maybe that's something you ought to do. Sadly, it fits in with the pattern of Donald Trump, though, because this was a guy who spent more than 2 years of his presidency not meeting the families of fallen American soldiers at Dover Air Force Base by tradition, as the president does, because he got criticized by a grieving father one time. And then after that, he refused to go for more than 2 years. This is a guy who is called the fallen soldiers in other contexts, suckers and losers. This is a guy who wouldn't go to a World War I cemetery because he didn't want to get his hair wet. Even if you agree with his policies, you have to look at Donald Trump and say, what is wrong with him as a person? What is broken inside of him that he doesn't have enough empathy to be able to call this family? But Joe Biden did. Joe Biden actually called the family. Helen, his widow, did not want to talk to Biden because she felt that it wouldn't be right, given that her husband had been such a big Trump supporter. But she made clear to a reporter for the New York Post that she did not bear any ill will toward Biden. It wasn't Biden's fault that this had happened. And to something else that's really true here, which is that there's such a vast disparity in the chaos and the propensity and proclivity toward violence between the two parties. And what we saw with all of this is that Trump's Republican Party is a party that is just sowing all of this chaos and violence. And then it's cropping up all over the place now. The gunman was a registered Republican, okay? This is somebody who we don't know everything about the motive yet, so some of this is speculation. But if we're thinking about why would a registered Republican who came from a household that had Trump signs outside of it up until recently, according to newer reports, why would someone like that go and try to shoot at former President Trump? And the answer is that there's actually, and the media has not been reporting on this nearly enough, because there is an ultra far right corner of Trump's base that views Trump as not extreme enough. They actually believe that he has outlived his purpose and that in many ways it would be better if he would be martyred so that it could actually create a justification for and make way for an even more extreme figure who would be, as these far right folks call it, a red Caesar. that they are looking for a dictator to basically take over in a post-democratic society, and that they're looking for their reason that would build enough public support for that to take place. The people that they would like to see be in that kind of Red Caesar role, the name that gets bandied about the most is probably Mike Flynn, former general. How are we even in this place? The last 9 years have been an era of discord worse than anything since the 1960s. And this is really one of the major messages that I hope that Joe Biden brings the rest of the way, is that it's not just about democracy being on the ballot. It's about mayhem and chaos and violence and violent rhetoric, and all of that being normalized and injected into the bloodstream of this country. And it's tearing us apart, and it needs to end. It's not American. It's not part of our best traditions. It's something that you'd think that we were past as a country, as a society, and yet here we are. At what point do we finally say enough is enough? And that's the thing I think we need to take away from Saturday so far. And coming up, a look at what the J.D. Vance pick really means for Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Next. Now let's do another deep dive on the newest big story of this week, which was Donald Trump's selection of Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate. This was not an unexpected selection in many ways. Vance had been on the short list this whole way. I had been very confident, though, as of the day before the selection was made, that we were going to get Vance, and I'll tell you why. It's because we had learned also that Elon Musk has now said, putting the lie to his earlier statements that he wasn't going to financially support either candidate, he has now determined that he is going to be providing $45 million a month, he claims, to a pro-Trump super PAC. Okay, when that news came out a couple of days ago, one of the first things that occurred to me was it's going to be J.D. Vance. He is going to be the Veep pick. And here's why. Because there is a whole connection here between Vance, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and Donald Trump. Peter Thiel and Elon Musk were two of the co-founders of PayPal. This goes back to the late 90s. And without going too deep into the weeds here, they have been friends and allies for a long time. Thiel has moved further and further and further and further over into the ideological far right over time. And he has pulled his protege and much more engaging and charismatic and telegenic friend and colleague, Elon Musk, and pulled him along. If you see clips of Peter Thiel, you're going to see why he needs somebody like Musk. Musk is the charismatic frontman, but Thiel is the one who is very much the ideological brains of the operation, and he has been over time courting more and more figures from Silicon Valley to join him on this journey to the farthest depths of the right wing. He probably deserves an entire episode unto himself at some point, but suffice it to say that J.D. Vance is another protege of Peter Thiel. Thiel first staked Vance by being the major backer of Vance's short-lived venture capital fund, then became Vance's major support financially for Vance's run for the U.S. Senate and being able to overcome a hard-fought Republican primary in Ohio. To me, this looks a heck of a lot like a backroom political deal in which Musk and Thiel were willing to put more money into the campaign. And as rich as Thiel is, Musk has even more money, especially on paper. That this was the condition, in my view, of Musk's support of Trump, was to make sure that their guy, J.D. Vance, was going to be on the ticket. This will mean that Vance is, as the saying goes, a heartbeat away from the presidency. It elevates Vance into being the next generation, somebody who will be potentially a front runner for the presidency in the future, it shows an even harder right turn. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But this should frighten everybody, but also expose exactly what's going on, which is that Donald Trump just sold himself to far-right big tech money. The notion that Donald Trump is somehow going to be the man of the people or to protect anybody from big business, which is a big part of his supposed appeal to people, the big part of his rhetoric, he just put the lie to all of that. He just got into bed with a couple of the biggest billionaires, a couple of the richest people in the country, and put their guy on his ticket, despite the fact that Vance is 39 years old, has only had elected office for about a year or so, and is one of the most underqualified people to be on a national ticket ever, although maybe that doesn't mean much because the most unqualified person to ever be on a national ticket and win especially is Donald Trump. But it's not just the money. There's also the extremism factor and what this means for where Trump is headed. There is no moderation that's coming. Everybody's been waiting for this. Back in 2016, 2017, Trump's going, once he gets into office, he'll be more pragmatic. He'll be more moderate. Just wait and see. All of this was a bunch of bluster. Didn't happen. He put kids into cages. He separated parents and children. He banned Muslims from the country. And that was just within his first 90 days or so as president. There was no moderation there. And there's not going to be any this time either. The notion that somehow he's going to try to get some kind of rapprochement with Nikki Haley and her supporters, that there was even talk that maybe Trump would surprise everybody and put Haley on the ticket after Haley had sort of come crawling back and endorsed Donald Trump. No, none of that happened. Instead, he doubled down on the most extreme part of his base by putting Vance in there. And Vance, mind you, we don't know if he believes any of this stuff either, but he's been such a craven opportunist that the things that he has said in order to get into elected life have been so appalling. The good news is that we have tons of evidence of all of this, and I think that it's going to be very clear to people where Vance stands and that he is not exactly going to do well on the national stage. Let's just give a couple of examples. There's two big things. One is his extremism regarding women, and another is his extremism regarding democracy. As for women, we're now looking at a guy on the Republican ticket. We already have Donald Trump. That's bad enough. But now we have a guy in that number 2 spot who has said that he opposes any kind of reproductive rights, even in the case of rape, which he has referred to as an inconvenience, and also that he believes that abused women should stay with their violent husbands for the good of the kids. This is the kind of guy we're talking about here. The worst kind of faux masculine misogynist jerk. That's who we're talking about when we talk about J.D. Vance. He would sell, actually, you know what? I was just about to say that he would sell his own grandmother. He did. This was a guy who sold his family's stories, aired all of his family's dirty laundry, made fun of and mercilessly mocked and patronized his neighbors and community members to sell a goddamn book, Hillbilly Elegy. That's what he did. He told his family's tales of poverty and addiction to make himself into a national figure and make himself some money. That's the kind of guy we're talking about here. He literally sold out his mother, his grandmother, everybody in his family, everybody in his community, just so he could pocket some money, make his little bag of gold, and turn himself into a national figure. That he has risen up to where he's at by clawing over everybody else that was in his life. That is the kind of guy he is. So it's maybe not surprising that then he would effectively turn back the clock for women to the 1800s or earlier. But this is the most extremely misogynistic part of the Republican Party, personified by Donald Trump, now doubly personified by J.D. Vance. And there's more, because Vance has also said that if he had been vice president on January 6th rather than Mike Pence, he would have done what Pence refused to do. He would have exceeded his legal and constitutional authority, presiding over the certification of the Electoral College votes, and thrown out or set aside a bunch of those duly elected electors. Set aside those votes, set aside those legitimate election results in violation of federal law and the Constitution. That is who J.D. Vance is. He would literally do anything for power and for climbing one rung higher on whatever pathetic little ladder he thinks he's on to get to the top. This is a really, really despicable human being who deserves not even to be in the United States Senate. The fact that he has that seat is bad enough, but to elevate him to this level, I do believe personally that the problem for the Republican Party here is that J.D. Vance doesn't have an iota of the unfortunate amounts of charisma that Donald Trump possesses, or Trump's way of manipulating the media. I don't think J.D. Vance is going to come out looking so well by the time this campaign season is over. I think that his extreme views and his shamelessness and his willingness to throw his own family and neighbors under the bus is not going to look so good. He's not going to be able to paper it over with any kind of Trumpian charisma. That's all for today's show. As always, if you like what you're hearing, make sure to follow this podcast and share it with your friends. You can also go watch it on YouTube. For more from me, sign up for my Substack. It is free to subscribe, and you'll always get the latest in your inbox every week. And make sure to follow me on Twitter. Thanks, and see you next week.